Let's talk about all the ways in which assumptions show up in our conversations, our relationships, and our fights. Since I've been making assumptions and paying the price for them for years now, I'll share my stories as examples of what not to do and offer some alternative approaches. You should be warned, though, I talk about some tough topics, and some of that might be triggering for you. Because to me, I don't think it's acceptable to not talk about this stuff. Oh, I'm also a little cussy. Please take care of yourself as you listen. Make yourself comfortable, grab a snack and a drink, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 2 of Confessions of a Chronic Assumer. I'm your host, Ellen Patnode, and I am a chronic assumer. So today we're going to talk about things that we're not supposed to say or even think or feel, but we're going to concentrate on the part that actually comes out of our mouths, and that's the stuff that we say. Where do these messages even come from? And why are they so harmful? And what are the assumptions that they reveal about what we're thinking, about what other people are thinking, and what are the assumptions that they actually create? And then we're going to wrap things up by answering this question. How do we overcome this shit? How do we overcome these assumptions so that we can move toward finding a solution? So when I was growing up, I fought with my mother a lot. I actually fought with her a lot throughout my entire life, but it definitely started when I was very young. She was a very controlling person and really uncomfortable with letting me navigate making my own decisions about really anything, which was a reflection of her own insecurity. She was projecting her assumptions onto me about the world around us and how scary it was. And she didn't want anything bad to happen to me. She didn't want any harm to come to me. And those assumptions about how dangerous the world were totally projected onto me in the form of be smaller, be quieter, don't say things to upset other people. Well, my personality and hardwiring being what they are, I couldn't help myself because the more she tried to control what I did, what I said, how I navigated my young life, the more I was determined to be the one in charge of making those decisions. And so that caused us to fight even more. My father, on the other hand, is one of the most introverted, shy people I've ever met. And he was always extremely uncomfortable with the level of arguing, the veracity of arguing that my mother and I would do. And in quiet moments with me alone, he was fond of saying, if you could just keep your damn mouth shut, we would not have any problems. We would have peace and quiet in our household. And I just, it was harmful on a couple of levels. It was harmful because it broke down my confidence. It, was coming from one of the most important people in my life who was telling me I was at fault. I was the cause of all of this arguing and my mother's vexation. But it also caused harm because it made me really, really angry. So it took away my confidence, it caused confusion, and it made me really angry because I didn't feel like there was anything that I could do about it. And, the assumptions that my dad was making in that situation was that my mother would be calmer and would yell less if I was calmer. But that was an enormous ask of a young child, right? It was based on an assumption that I had the ability to be more mature than I actually was. It also led to my assumption that I was the problem all the time, that it was always my fault, and that I was too loud, I was too much, I was too argumentative, I was too pushy. When I started caregiving for my mother, I did so against my will. I'm not going to lie. I wrote extensively about it in the book, so if you've read that book, you could call me out on it. I only agreed to be a caregiver for my mother because my father asked me to. He was at the end of his rope. My wife and I had a farm with a carriage house. The setup was right. So I reluctantly agreed that they could move into that carriage house so that we could help care for my mother. But there were a lot of things wrapped up in caregiving that I was not supposed to talk about, as I discovered. One was how hard it was. Another was how angry I felt, how resentful I felt of being put in that position, of my brother not stepping up more. I was also not supposed to talk about how frustrated I felt with my mother as the person needing the caring. And I was certainly not supposed to talk about ways in which I took that frustration out. I learned that by going to a caregiver support group and having people shift around uncomfortably as I would describe some of the situations that we were living through. I also wasn't supposed to talk about how much I was struggling to do anything that could be considered part of the realm of self-care. I wasn't supposed to talk about the way in which I was forcing takeovers to happen against my mother's will because I felt like it was in her best interest. All of these things were so harmful because I was very much internalizing dangerous messages about my ability, about my capacity, about my self-worth, which had an effect on how I would advocate for my mom and what I was willing to ask for. My mother's assumptions in the middle of all of it was that I was the enemy. I was trying to take away her autonomy. I was out to get her, and that I wasn't doing anything correctly because I wasn't doing it exactly the way she would want it done. And then my own assumptions was that I was, in fact, not doing anything right, that I was, in fact, being incredibly disrespectful, that I was disrespecting her autonomy, and that I was failing on so many different levels. In the realm of work, we make just as many, if not more, assumptions all the time about what we are supposed to talk about and what we're not supposed to talk about. Some of those assumptions are around our coworkers. We're not supposed to talk about it if we don't like a coworker, if we don't like something they've said or done. In some workplace cultures, we're not supposed to disagree with each other's ideas. We're not supposed to ask too many questions, or at least we assume we're not supposed to ask too many questions, whatever too many actually is. And there's also an assumption that we're supposed to avoid hard conversations. We're not supposed to talk about that stuff. This is harmful because we let shit fester. There's so many problems that happen in a team dynamic because people are unwilling to say uncomfortable things or say what's hard. We don't want to hurt people's feelings. And so what happens is that assumptions end up running rampant. Things get spread around. It turns from my assumption about my coworker and what their motivations and intentions are into coloring how the team feels about that coworker, right? So there's additional harm in the way this stuff gets spread around and festers in a team. And probably the biggest harm that's done is that decisions don't get made. Action isn't taken, and we lose momentum. This can have serious effects on productivity. And really, it's all rooted in these assumptions we're making that we might hurt somebody's feelings and that our reputation is somehow going to be damaged if we're engaging in these hard conversations. Here's the bottom line. We have to do better in all of this stuff, whether it's in your personal relationships with the people closest to you at home, or it's in the realm of your working environment. Here are a few things that I think we can do that help us overcome some of these assumptions about what we are and are not allowed to say and get a better result. One is we have to be willing to approach with more curiosity. So rather than coming at somebody to start in and give an accusation about what you are assuming is happening, what you assume to be the circumstance or the case, instead approach with more curiosity. Start asking questions to say, I'm sort of struggling with this. I want to make sure that I'm understanding correctly, and then start asking some questions. Another thing we can do is one that we give a ton of lip service to, but we're not actually great at for real doing it, which is For real, consider it from their perspective. I mean, really put yourself in their shoes for a second. What do you know about this person? What do you know about how they receive feedback or information? What do you know about how they tend to respond in different situations? Considering their perspective puts you in a position of being able to tailor your approach to something that you think will actually work with them, will resonate with them. Another thing we can do is be willing to have the hard conversation. All too often, I talk to people who say, well, that's a difficult person, I just avoid them. Okay, that's bullshit. When you're avoiding somebody, you're only making the problem worse, right? And it doesn't do anything to bolster your own confidence. And it certainly doesn't do anything to resolve the issue. So making sure that you're willing to actually have the hard conversation, stay at the table, lean in instead of leaning away. When we feel like we don't trust somebody, when we feel like we don't like somebody, we tend to have this reaction of like, I'm going to lean away. I'm just going to sit back and be like, well, fuck them. They're not taking the right approach. They're not doing it right. I don't like what they had to say. I don't like the tone of the email. I don't like what I think they said about me to somebody else. Throw all of that crap out the window and lean in more. Be willing to sit down and say, I don't think I have the right understanding of this. Or maybe I do, but we need to work through this. We need to figure out some more productive ways that we can engage in real conversation because we've got decisions to make and work to do. So leaning in rather than that urge to lean away can go a long way to helping us overcome those assumptions and get to the bottom of what's actually going on instead of what we've told ourselves is going on. Another important thing is we've got to be willing to apologize, right? I've had to learn this lesson. I can't even count how many times over the years throughout my professional and personal life. If you say something that is upsetting to another person, apologize. My kids, when my son was younger, he helped me understand this through this analogy. He said, because I hurt his feelings, and I was like, well, I'm sorry that I hurt your feelings. He said, listen, Mom, if you accidentally step on my toe and then you come and apologize for stepping on my toe, I might be able to say, okay, that's fine. I understand you didn't mean it, but my toe still actually hurts. So just because you apologize doesn't automatically make it better. And that's really true. At the same time, too often we don't even bother to apologize. We feel self-righteous in what it is that we've said. And we're just like, well, they misunderstood me. No, instead, lean into that concept that we apologize in a way that's meaningful to the other person, not just meaningful to us. So if you can see that what you've said has been taken personally and that wasn't your intention, you could apologize in a way that says, I can see that really hurt your feelings, and I want you to know that was not my intention. This isn't personal. Instead, here's what it's about. And then try again. Apologize and then try again. The last thing I think we need to consider in terms of ways that we can overcome these assumptions about what we should and should not be talking about is to respect each other's differences. Again, that's something we give a lot of lip service to, but we're not great at doing it all the time. Not everybody needs to be like you. Not everybody needs to have the same perspective or opinion as you. In fact, one might argue that's actually what makes us a lot more interesting as a collective or as a community, is when we don't see everything the same way. When we have different experiences that we bring to the table and they're reflected in the ideas that we have and in the direction we want to go in. So being willing to respect those differences means we have to see them and acknowledge them. We can't pretend that they don't exist, and we can't just gravitate to the people who think just like we do. When we're able to lean in and have those different perspectives represented in one conversation, it creates an opportunity to open our minds to new possibilities and new ideas. And when that happens, all of a sudden the different approach isn't wrong. It's just different. We can see the possibilities beyond it. So thanks for joining me today. I want to make sure you come back next time. We're going to talk about how assumptions and confidence evolve in a cycle. They have a cyclical relationship to one another. We're going to talk about that next time. In the meantime, if you want to find me on socials, you can find me on LinkedIn at Ellen Patnode, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Patnode Coaching. I want you to remember what the late, great Albert Einstein said. Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. Don't do the same and expect different. Do different to get different. Have a great week.